Hiya, welcome to the show. Definitely see a few familiar faces who've seen us before at these Festival of Ideas events that we do, the Soccer Mad Boffins sports-themed talks. Today we've got Tosh Warwick, and I've known Tosh. I'm Alex, this is Kevin, by the way. We work at University of York School for Business and Society. And we know Tosh because we've done quite a lot of research on the business history of football. And we were studying Middlesbrough, who used to play at Ayresome Park and now at the Riverside Stadium. And we were researching the FIFA World Cup as well in 1966, where some games were hosted there. And we've known Tosh for a number of years. We've done a couple of events and things with him and cited each other back and forth in these papers. And one of the common kind of themes around that has been like the grounds and stadiums where these things are held. Tosh is working on a book at the minute all about some of these old football stadiums, which he'll talk about in more depth. But it just basically got us thinking it would be a great idea for an event and for him to talk about what he's doing a little bit. We've had some good adventures along the way, looking at some of these old stadiums, visiting Ayresome Park, having a look around with Tosh. Well, what's there now? He'll talk about maybe the art installation that's there. And then another time, myself and Kevin visited Bradford Park Avenue and managed to get into the ground. And there was some kind of sports day going on at maybe a local school. So we were stood on the old terraces and we could hear what it must have been like. We thought maybe there was ghosts there at first, but I think it turned out it was a local sports day. And then, of course, we tried to get out and realised someone had just left a gate open and we'd wandered in by mistake. We had to then jump over this 10-foot wall on the other side. That was quite funny. All got a bit Indiana Jones, but it's good fun researching these old football grounds. The things you can see and visit some of them, or visit the old sites, as well as researching them archivally through the books, through people's memories. So hopefully you find it as interesting as we do. I'll hand over to Kevin and then he'll hand over to Tosh. Thank you.
So thanks, Alex. So welcome everybody to the university. It's great to see such a big turnout. You might have heard my interview on Radio York yesterday. And there we kind of hinted at some of the bigger, kind of deeper, kind of urban and social history issues and economic history as well, issues that exist behind this. So, football grounds of this kind of era are kind of byproduct of industrialization, if you like, but also support a lot of the kind of townscape around them. This is one of the kind of big underlying issues, if you like, in York. For example, when the stadium was moved out of town, it's been an underlying issue in other places in the UK as well, so I'm sure you're kind of aware. So these are the sorts of big issues that Tosh's research really is helping to kind of explicate for us and make more clear, kind of find out more about, essentially. Okay, so I shall hand over to Tosh, who'll speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion here, and then we'll open it up to questions. And this is usually where it's quite exciting for us as academics, because usually the public brings in exciting new ideas as well for us. Okay, so thanks very much. Okay, so Tosh.
All right, cheers, Kevin. Thanks a lot. First of all, thank you all for coming. Thanks to the York Festival of Ideas for coming along, and thanks to Alex and Kevin for having me here and shamelessly promoting my research. And that little baby will stop crying at some point, I promise. Right, okay, so I'm discovering lost football grounds and terraces, looking at some of the places that are really important to local people, some of the places that are national icons, places that are part of the built environment, part of people's memories, family connections, archaeological and architectural triumphs. So we're looking at this kind of broad range of, what a football ground means, what is the point in the football ground, and, typical of a Borough fan, they leave early because they can't face the ending. But that's an earlier version of that one there. That's me. I grew up in South Bank in Middlesbrough. I was brought up as a Borough family. First game was against a Yorkshire side. Whether Middlesbrough's in Yorkshire or not, I don't know. It was against Sheffield United. We won 6-0. Stuart Ripley scored a hat-trick. I was 4 years old. Apparently I enjoyed it, but I have no recollection of it. I'll talk a bit about my work with the borough, Middlesbrough that is, rather than Scarborough, Essen Park and the Riverside. I'm going to ask why a lost football ground is important. Are they important? I need a bit of help from you to tell me if it's worth doing this project. A quick look at Yorkshire's lost football grounds. Yesterday I was in Cardiff talking about this topic, but I had to adapt it to include Ninian Park and the Vetch and Racecourse and so on. So it's a bit of a geographical shift back up north now. And I'll talk a bit about the book and shamelessly promote it, and some of the work I've been doing with an artist called Paul Town as well, and the man who paints football who's in Scotland at the moment. So South Bank is where I grew up. South Bank is a key part of Northern football identity. That's a picture from around about 1970, we reckon. You can see the conveyor from the Cleveland Works in the background there. You can see the chimneys from the works at Lackenby in the distance. You can see the housing estate of South Bank kind of penning in the ground. And one of the things that Kevin mentioned yesterday on BBC Radio York was these football grounds are very different to the grounds of today. These grounds are shaped by their environment very much. They're very much they're built where they can be built. They're not built on vast brownfield sites. So places like South Bank, it was built where they could fit it in proximity to the church next door and not too far from the associated Dorman Long Works. And similarly, you know, when you go to places like Norwich, that was their ground, the Nest, was built in a quarry. So it's very adaptive, it's very kind of creative the way in which these grounds have been built. A lot of these grounds obviously have disappeared, even though they're a key part of local identity and a key part of that area's soul, I think. And you know, that newspaper cutting there is from the Sports Gazette from 1922. What's left of their material is either rotting away in a basement in Middlesbrough, or there's a selection at the British Library in Boston Spa. But that was the ground in the mid-1990s. There's 2 arson attacks on the ground, one in 1991 that partly succeeded, and the one a few years later that obliterated the ground. But this is from the Cowley collection up in Teesside Archives, and that photo there is of the gate for Wolf Mannion. So this was converted into Golden Boy Green, so it retained that leisure function, it retained that kind of sporting function, but sadly there's no football pitch there. The actual new venue they built was burnt down as well, so it's not great. But there's a kind of resonance there, the fact that even though the football ground's gone, somewhere probably a bit more affluent like York, they would build expensive £250,000 to £500,000 houses there. In South Bank, that's not going to happen. So instead, they've kind of repurposed it as this community function, but it still has that connection to the past. And South Bank's most famous son, Wolf Mannion, who grew up on the same street as I did, which is quite nice. So going back to Yorkshire's football grounds, and this is where my kind of first experience of losing a football ground came about. And I was 11-year-old when I went to the last league game at Essen Park on the 30th of April 1995. And there's a real sense of a historic day, according to the Sports Gazette, Eric Paler. This sense of loss, this sense of moving on, but crucially, this idea that this is progress, it was required. So even though we romanticise about grounds and how important they are and how we should never leave them, I think in the 1990s, especially off the back of the Hillsborough disaster, these decaying, expensive grounds to maintain, they were kind of seen as something to leave behind, to remember but leave behind, you know. And you could get various grants as well, development corporations, when we used to have EU funding. These all contributed to, you know, bringing regeneration to a lot of these brownfield sites that occurred because of the deindustrialisation of the industries on which a lot of these footballing cultures were actually built. So it's this kind of full circle motion. So the industries that once supported the football clubs became the sites of them. So around the 25th anniversary of Ayresome Park, I worked with the borough, I worked with the Northern Echo, the Gazette, the Middlesbrough Football Club Foundation to try and remember Ayresome Park, see if there's any kind of, what can we do to mark this, because I think I saw Rob Nichols wandering somewhere, I'm not sure, I might imagine that there he is. Rob Nichols is the fanzine editor at Middlesbrough, and Rob will probably agree with me that Middlesbrough Football Club, historically, haven't been very good at celebrating their heritage. Their archive for a long time was in a cupboard. I think a lot of it still is. Some of it's in a damp cupboard, well, a fairly not suitable cupboard in the east end of the riverside. So we tried to do something that would kind of turn this on its head a bit, you know, and try and remember that past. So we've done a lot of stuff for the whole week of Ayresome Week, around the story of Ayresome Park. We had people submit their pictures. So we had Charles Ryan send in some photos there. That was actually from when he went to the match, again at the bottom corner there. You know, so people kind of responded to this. You know, people don't respond to send us a photo of the museum when you're a kid, send us a photo of a church when you're a kid. The football ground has a totally different appeal. This was during the height of COVID in 2020. So we had planned to have an exhibition in the town, but because of COVID, it went digital. So we developed some education resources for the kids that wouldn't have any grasp of what Ayresome Park even is. And then we had this live stream, or this live broadcast of the match, and that's our front room back in April 2020, and my wife had to put up with Ayresome Week for the whole week. We also mobilised Ayresome Week to have a bit of an artistic turn as well. So we had people come in like Stuart Roy Clark, the author of The Homes of Football, fantastic book. It's been published in several different languages, it's been revised. And we also had some work contributed from various Middlesbrough artists and those from further afield that are quite keen on football. So this one is this one of the main stand, the Archibald Leach stand at Ayresome Park. That's something I think it's apparently going to make its way to my house at some point. It's been gifted to me. But we had all kinds of stuff in the exhibition. We had Archibald Leach digital plans. They're now on tour. There were at the Design Museum in London. They're in Zurich at the FIFA Museum recently, and now they're in Wolverhampton. So there's a cultural kind of journey that they've been on. The early caricatures, Richard Pierce Rayner, the club's artist in residence, famous for Road to Perdition and Marvel and DC Comics. Robin Dale's fantastic photos talking about North Korea's 1966 success with an animated film with T4 football, all the way through to some sculptures. That one in the bottom corner, Kate Noakes, is now wedged on my bookshelf at home and causes all kinds of grief in our house, that one. And Neville Gaby's a fantastic artist, and what they've done on the site of Ayresome Park, and this is why I have such an interest in Bootham Crescent, and I had hoped to get back to it before I'd done this talk. They used Ayresome Park as I think it's one of the earliest examples of where ground has been repurposed. It's a generic housing estate, but it has these nice nuances, this nice recognition of that footballing past. It's embedded. So you have this kind of manifestation of enclosure as blasted into the walls. You have had Neville and Harry Pearson produce this trophy room book. And you'll see this cast scarf, you'll see there's a metal jumper, jumpers for goalposts. The studs are cast in bronze, I think it is, or brass, or bronze, of Pac Dewick from where he scored. The location's actually wrong, where that is, but I don't think it really matters, to be honest. You know, it's only Rob and me that know that, and a few of us. You know, no one else is really bothered about that. But what is important though is that, and there's proof of this in this room, by using this to sell the area, People buy houses there because it's on Ayresome Park. And Persimmon at the moment are doing exactly the same at Bootham Crescent. The showroom at Bootham Crescent, the show house, it has footballs on the walls of the show house. It has the chocolate strip of York City framed on the bedroom wall. So these York fans can imagine living there. At Ayresome Park, the editor of Fly Me to the Moon, Rob Nichols, the very man himself, lives on the site of Ayresome Park. He said in the local newspaper that he couldn't resist the draw of living where he'd spent all his time as, with such leisure. I can't remember the quote. But football grounds beyond the borough, Simon Inglis, lost in historic football grounds. These football grounds of Great Britain really turned the way in which we understand football grounds. He talks about the experience, he talks about the enthusiastic ways in which if you pass a football ground on a train, you'll strain your neck to see a glimpse of a floodlight. And there's been unprecedented change. Writing in the 1980s, he talks about these being, thousands of people attending these places, despite falling gates. They're better used than places of entertainment or even worship. Rob Sheard, who was involved in the design, the architect of Huddersfield's McAlpine Stadium, he says that today football stadiums can be regarded as among the most important buildings a city possesses, because where you have events, it's where the city is seen by millions of people across the globe, the high profile. And Simon Inglis too, in 2005, in his engineering Archie book, he talks about, people saying these new grounds are generic bulls and so on. So football fans do have a care about the appearance of these grounds, and there's a longing for the grounds of yesteryear. And I think a lot of people in this room have a longing for Bootham Crescent, I'd suggest. I think there's a few. Can I show hands how many York fans there are in the room? Oh, good number, yeah. And they're an intrinsic part of society. There's family associations, it's part of your social life, part of your daily ritual, and they're very popular venues as well. So York City, I think the stats from about 2 years ago, 127,975 through their gates. Clifford's Tower, 171,986. So this was in the last season at Bootham, I think. Hull City, they get 500,000 through their gates, more than 500,000 the Deep, the same number. Scarborough Athletic, 45,000. Scarborough Castle, only 30,000 more. They're a non-league side. And Leeds United get 934,000 people through their gate compared to 224,000 in the City Museum. So these are places where people enjoy their culture. It's where people spend their leisure time. This myth of, it's all high culture, it's all museums, all theatres, they can simply not compete with football. They don't have the same number of repeat customers. If we accept football as a money-making enterprise, which it is, it's a business, they're performing quite successfully in terms of their market capture. The way in which football grounds has been consumed, the lost football grounds have been remembered, has changed an awful lot. The advent of the lost football grounds and terraces of the UK, Facebook group in April 2020 during COVID has been absolutely incredible. It's a kind of rejection of modern football, and it provides an avenue for people to share their material. Greg Wright there with his photos of Bootham Crescent at the end, Alan Isherwood looking at revisiting the former ground, and then the incredible work of Tony Cole, who I've now managed to link up with on Twitter. He captured the last days of Bootham Crescent, and the really kind of emotive photos it shows. This is something that's really relevant. We romanticise about football grounds and we say how they've always been what people wanted. Here in Yorkshire, that's quite a myth. In Scarborough, when they moved grounds from a field, effectively, they wanted to remain near Manor Road. And the supporters in 1898, they rejected this idea of moving to what was the athletic ground, or the Theatre of Chips, as it was known later on with the McCain sponsor. But then people warmed to these grounds. So just like now, when people are saying we don't want to move to a new ground, this happened exactly the same 126 years ago. And obviously we've now lost the McCain Stadium. There's a new ground just over the road, more or less. And it was also one of these grounds that, had this kind of reinvention with the local company, getting on board a sponsorship. I won't show the video because we don't have time, but the death of Scarborough FC was also the death of that football ground, and the fact that people take their time out to go and visit these spaces, to go and to capture these last moments before they disappear, to become a Lidl, I think it is now. There's new ways in which these have been interpreted. The Stadium Lane is what is on the site of Scarborough's new ground, and this is quite common practice elsewhere as well. And just last week at Bootham Crescent, they named one of the streets after the greatest ever goal scorer of York City, and they're going to continue to do that as part of their development. In Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, where I work, Sheffield, Bramall Lane, this is one of these hybrid grounds where a football ground has taken over a cricket ground. So it's been this kind of multi-purpose areas that have been lost or adapted. So I don't think losing football grounds is just about the ground disappearing. It's about losing some of the character, losing some of the peculiar features. So grounds like Old Trafford, grounds like, I'm trying to think of grounds that have been changed an awful lot. Newcastle, they bear very, very, very little resemblance to what was there when they were first conceived. And you see that there from behind the goal at Bramall Lane. The Hillsborough disaster was seen as a real shift in terms of football ground architecture and the way in which we approach football grounds and the safety of grounds. And I was reading just on Thursday about Archibald Leach doing some interventions at Cardiff for this very purpose, to make it safer. These disasters have happened throughout history, and it happened at Hillsborough as well. At Owlerton in 1914 against Wolves, when we had a terrace collapse. So this is not new. So football grounds are sites of memory. Obviously Lepping Lane, the loss of 97 lives as a result of the Hillsborough disaster. We saw that converted into seating, but the ground was still selected for Euro 96, seen as kind of vindicating that stadium. Elland Road, that's changed an awful lot from the days of the old Peacock ground when it was owned by the nearby brewery. When Leeds City went under, Leeds United were formed. But even there, a lot of their archive was lost, and these photographs are precious because they capture the loss of the stand at Elland Road as a result of a fire. Even though it was burnt out like that, the following Saturday, Leeds won 1-0, but the fans actually stood on the terraces even though it was almost burned down. Incredible. There's no purpose to it. There's no reason why they stand there other than that attachment. There's room elsewhere in the ground, but they wanted to stand where they'd once stood. It was almost a defiance, kind of reclaiming their space. Hull. So approaches to lost grounds have changed over time. In Hull, they're trying to uncover the Anlaby Road remnants that are right next to their new ground. Trying to rediscover that, and there's a supporters group leading that, and that follows in the path of Bradford Park Avenue in terms of trying to rediscover these areas where these football grounds once stood. So that's 2 grounds to go for Hull City. Boothferry Park, there's lots of stuff to be found in archives, and Boothferry Park is remembered now by arts installations, a bit like Ayresome Park. The Boothferry Park train halt, which is built especially for the ground, is remembered by street naming. There's these metal blocks that talk about it being a magical place and the emotions of a night match. And Milmer are at Rotherham United. They no longer play there. The ground's been abandoned for a long time, owned by the nearby company, very controversially, I understand. But it's now been repurposed for youth football, and I was lucky enough to go there and drag Abigail along. She cried about 5 seconds after that picture, but I wanted to introduce her to some football and an old ground. So it's a bit contentious, but it shows there's a purpose for these spaces. People want to go, and there's hundreds of people there for a kids' game. They wouldn't have been there if it wasn't for that. Bradford City, that's been remembered. The Valley Parade fire, the loss of that, and transformation of that ground's been remembered culturally through the death of the 56 and the play that followed from that. And Bradford Park Avenue, Archibald Leach Ground, was remembered through the archaeological work and project Breaking Ground. Jason Wood, Alan Ward, Neville, David Pendleton and team, they produced this fantastic project where they rediscovered the terraces, they dug up the remnants of the pitch, they discovered safety pins which were used to keep the goalkeeper's shorts up, and it happened that his family member was there and recalled this when they were doing the dig. So it's an award-winning project, and I know there's a few in the room involved in that. But finally, Bootham Crescent. I'm over time here, but I have 2 more minutes. Is that all right? So Bootham Crescent has been at the heart of a real change in terms of attitudes towards lost football grounds. Previously, it's been kind of you're catching up and you're doing this after the ground's demolished, and it's little groups of people that are doing it, and it's very unofficial. This is a key coordinated effort, again with Jason Wood, to record and remember and dig at Bootham Crescent before they moved, working with a football club, working with a supporters trust, and it's been on TV, archaeological publications, academic outputs. There's a Sharing Memory Shaping Place, Historic England project, and this really shows that there's a value now. There's a recognition that football grounds are important after all. I might just try and show you some footage very quickly, just for a minute, just to show you what they were talking about.
Since Historic England began this series of films over 2 years ago, our focus has been not just about capturing people's memories of Bootham Crescent, but also how to shape and drive the redevelopment of the site to best reflect those memories and create a new and distinctive place with real character. As we begin 2021, with York City having played its last game at Bootham Crescent, this 7th film describes the legacy plans to memorialise the stadium within the proposed housing scheme. After consultation with the club, fans, residents, local politicians and the planning authority, it became clear that there was a strong desire for retaining a tangible part of the stadium, somewhere people could focus their memories, somewhere they could orientate themselves after the stadium had gone, and somewhere they could continue to pay their respects. The challenge to create this lasting legacy and focal point for memory and orientation demanded us to think sensitively and imaginatively, and to improve on earlier redevelopments of other football grounds by doing far more than simply naming streets after famous players or laying a plaque on the centre spot. Working with the club and the developers Persimmon Homes, the legacy plans are now in the process of being designed. The main feature will be the retention of a short section of the popular Standard Terrace and the tunnel beneath. A unique survival, the tunnel once permitted rival fans to switch ends at half-time. It was also used as an air raid shelter during World War II, which adds to it a further layer of meaning and significance. The tunnel has been disused for some time, but still bears witness to the friendly rivalry between York City and Bradford Park Avenue.
In that era, it was unfortunate, you used to get quite a few incidents where fans got involved with each other, let's say. I was always one that was on the parade.
So just to kind of to finish there, but that's well worth watching if you've not seen that before. It's a real good journey, but this week there's been the first signs of the street naming conventions, and they're going to have this memorial garden where they repurpose the terraces. But this is a book that's going to come out eventually. I've got loads of books to come out, but this one's coming out next year. I've got a George Campbell want to amend now that it's finished. So there's a Lost Football Grounds group. I'm doing the book for them. That hopefully it'll be successful because there's 400,000 people on that group. So if 1% buy it, I'll take Abigail on a nice holiday. But I want to hear from you as well. So if you have any memories, histories, archives, photos, any people you should think I should interview. I've been all over the country doing this. Give me a shout, and I'd love to speak to you, so please do come and speak to me once we've finished our conversation, and sorry for running over time, I knew I would. All right, thank you.
Okay, I think I'm back on, Mike. Brilliant. Well, myself and Kevin will ask a couple of questions just to break the ice a bit and get things going, and then we'll open some questions up to the floor as well, with what time we've got. So, everyone's mic switched on.
There we go, yeah. I'm on.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So my first question for you, Tosh, is, with the exception of Ayresome Park, so you're not allowed to, that as an answer, the exception of Ayresome Park, which is your favourite lost football ground?
I've been toying with this quite a lot the past few days. It's hard to pick one. I really enjoyed going to Bootham Crescent. I went there with Middlesbrough a few times, and there's something special about having these grounds in the close to the town centre, within a mile of the railway station. I think that's really helpful. It helps build that whole day experience. So it means you can go for a pint quite easily. That's what I mean by that. But you know, it has this real kind of draw, and you know, when I started conceiving this project, by now Goodison Park should have been a lost ground, but it's been extended. But I'd probably say Goodison would have been one of them if it had gone yet. I really enjoyed going to Highbury. Highbury is, I've not had a chance to mention it there, but Highbury is quite a brilliant example of the way in which grounds have been reinvented. So there's a listed building, the main stand there, and Highbury is very special. It's very close. It's very tight to the pitch. So in stark contrast to that, when you go to the Emirates Stadium today, it's so different, so detached. It's like you're watching it on telly. The views are better, of course they are. It's safer, there's more amenities. So I'm not saying we should go back to these grounds, but I'm just saying it's a very different experience. So Highbury, Bootham, obviously I'm being very diplomatic as well. Yeah, but I think there's, I mean, Main Road is fantastic. I'm trying to think of ones where Middlesbrough have won away as well, you know, which is quite hard to kind of pick them out. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Tosh, for that answer. Kevin, would you like to ask one?
Yeah, have you thought about, one thing that occurs to me is that a big part of being a football fan is that process of kind of involvement over a number of years, and it's that whole area of being able to kind of spend, you know, it's not just kind of the home games, it's the away games, and then there's a whole area as well of kind of a whole enthusiast community of ground hoppers that kind of make the whole thing about trying to visit the most obscure non-league grounds and all this kind of thing. So have you thought about the differences in perceptions between home and away fans? Because if you speak to away fans, you know, they'll have favourite grounds to go away to, but then they're typically kind of, you know, they were typically treated a lot worse in those grounds, and kind of, you know, marginalised would be the wrong word, but it's kind of, you know, so but that was part of the kind of the excitement of it as well.
Well, Kevin's been very diplomatic again there, but it's, when you say marginalised, it means getting chased down alleys by home fans. So, you know, so when you're going down Boot Boy Alley, and you know, and people recall going to Ayresome Park, for example, they said it was a horrendous place to go. You know, you're running from the station to along Limthorpe Road, you know, to the ground and back. But I think over time people kind of romanticise this, and I think there's a danger with that. Even in terms of York City and the exchange in the tunnels, even though most of the time it was fairly amenable, there's times when it really kicked off in there. Really kicked off, and it was on the video there. When they elaborate a bit further on the longer version, they talk about, you know, these kind of scuffles that break out, and also when people have a lot of alcohol before football matches. You know, there's this kind of aggression, and I think particularly derbies, or particularly, you know, for some kind of tension between clubs, that's really volatile. And when it's done in these grounds where it's a housing estate, that's very problematic. But yeah, I think there's certainly I think some of the grounds that people talk to about, you know, having a longing to go for, Ayresome Park came up quite a lot. A place like Main Road, so it's almost like this kind of, you know, going into this cauldron is something that appeals and part of that excitement. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we should invite some questions from the audience now, I guess. So we've got our microphone manager over here. So
Lawrence has got.
Maybe a question over here first.
Thanks very much, Tosh. That was fascinating. I am a Middlesbrough fan. I'm not from Middlesbrough, as you can tell, but my dad grew up in South Bank, went to Winnie Banks school. Once came home from school and found number 10 viewing his parents' house with the thought of buying it, which anyway says a lot. I wanted to pick up on the point you just made. And ask a slightly annoying academic question. If you went back to the 70s and the 80s, almost all the academic literature on football is about hooligans, and it's about alienated working class post-industrial masculinity. The picture you painted is it's a very different picture, and you didn't mention gender. And I understand the point about the Hillsborough, the legislation forcing changes to grounds. What else has happened? It can't just be Hillsborough, can it? You make a good point. That's it's happened at Hillsborough. Where's the shift in thinking about grounds?
I think there's been a lot of encouragement from televising football. I think you see this kind of occur at the top and then kind of trickle down. I think, at the end, the broadcasters want nice venues to broadcast from. They want a nice backdrop, and there's a really nice clip from about 30 years ago, I think it is now, where they're talking about this rival of Sky and this taking over of football, and they're talking about, they want this nice kind of the football ground almost as a set. So I think that's been a key factor. I think Hillsborough was inescapably a key factor as well. I think there's also a realisation that there was a broader audience that could be engaged with these new football grounds, these new developments, and there's money to be made. And I don't like this idea that football is never commercialised, it's never about money. It's always been about money. That's the whole reason for football existing. People wanting to make money out of it, whether directly or in terms of projecting their business, or what good people they were, so people got behind their given ironworks or elected them in 1910 in the case of Middlesbrough. So I think there's societal expectations have been reflected as well. There's been broader recognition that the less male-dominated spaces, I think they're still driven towards males. I think there's still that's still the overriding notion. I think these kind of projects where we look at the past, that probably becomes very apparent that these were predominantly male spaces. There weren't just male spaces though, and in the book when it comes out, I've tried to address this, and I was talking in Cardiff yesterday, and when they'd done the interventions to the main grandstand in 1928, after they'd won the FA Cup and had a bit of money to spend, they're very conscious that the middle class women who went along in the director's box had facilities put in place. So when Archibald Leach was invited to make these interventions, they put the female toilets in, they had these rooms, these retreat rooms put in. So there's a very conscious way in which to change the way in which the amenities and the communities in that ground were looked after. Does that answer the question on that? I don't know. Yeah. Cheers, Lawrence.
All right, let's have another go. Anyone got a hand up? Oh, here we go, Dixon.
Hi, I'm Jason, a lifelong York City fan. Just wondered if you'd done any research into the business model around football grounds and how that seems to be shifting now. So from where clubs have owned their ground versus not owning their ground. That's the situation with York City at the moment. It's a well-known hypothesis that there's no money to be made in football unless you own your own ground. Just wondered what thoughts you had on that.
I've not done a lot of research on it, but I'm sure Ken and Alex might chip in here. But I think there's certainly this shift in terms of, certainly these new grounds aren't, I don't think they are football grounds. I think the venues, I think the stadiums. I think it's very conscious, and I think if you look at, I was talking to one of the, he's actually a board member at Ipswich, but he's a Tottenham fan, if that works. I was talking to him on Friday night, and the whole setup there is way beyond the match day revenue. It's about having the NFL there. It's about having this, this pitch that can be removed almost immediately. In Cardiff, and I know it's a rugby ground, but it's used for football as well. They had, there's adverts all over, not for about getting Taylor Swift there. Sunderland, these are all year-round venues now. They're income generators, and owning the stadium is where you kind of make the money. And I think you see this resistance as well. So when you had, this kind of businessification of the football ground, there's loads of anxiety about Mike Ashley having an interest in the Ricoh Arena, and obviously what they did at Newcastle. But I think the harsh reality is last night in Middlesbrough they had James Arthur playing at the Riverside, and there's a real realisation that these are now resources. These are, the football is what happens for 23 days of the year. Then beyond that, these need to be a key economic and infrastructure contribution to the given city or the given businesses might be the case. Yeah,
I would expand on that as well, because the commercial end gets a lot of it's income for the club, and they put like York businesses around it. There's a lot of places to eat and that kind of thing, big leisure centre really, the indoor golf and all kinds of things. But there's also a theory about public health, and when you talk about there being a resource for the local area, the theory is that if you want to kind of normalise building in healthy lifestyles and things, that you position like swimming baths, places where you get your blood and your health checked and all that, near these kind of stadiums as well, because it's for the people they're often trying to reach. They like going to football, they like going to leisure places, and there's a health link between sport and health, obviously. But it's also part of like a day-to-day life, like a reason for going. So you'll get a swimming pool, an NHS clinic, all this tagged on in that space as well. That's good income for the clubs because it's probably a nice tenant to have, But one of the reasons they do that is because this theory of positioning like health and leisure with leisure really, and normalising it for the community. So it's a resource for the people as well as opening yet another burger restaurant.
I mean, just to pick up on that very briefly though, I think there's a different question here in terms of scales. So when you have these community stadiums, so they make sure to have the community stadium in the title. York is, I'll get shot for saying this in York, but York is now, because I went there with one of the directors for the Borough game a few years ago, back with John, and I went to Scarborough as well, and even though they're bigger at York, the model isn't too far removed. It's more commercialised around York, but you have that multi-use. It's a sports centre at Scarborough. They have all these amenities, these businesses, these leisure, the library at York. So it's a very different model in terms. So whereas at Tottenham you have Beavertown Brewery in there, at York you have the library in there. But I think so it's about where the funding's coming from for these new grounds, especially. Who's the driver behind it? What's the city's civic agenda? Have the secured external funding. If you secured external funding from a major nation, that's very different to having local community funding, because they want to kind of sell the ground off, make some money out of it, and say, there you go, find us a home. Yeah.
Myself and Kevin, we did like Rob initially and Tosh through the Middlesbrough sort of case, looking at in the 80s, and there was money made available to open a leisure centre they were going to use as an indoor sports hall for training purposes. There's a training at Hutton Road before that, which anyone who knows the area is it was outdoors and it wasn't an ideal facility, shall we say. But they built this indoor thing, and they got grant money, and there's a change in government, the grant got halved. It took them a lot of time to get it on stream. There was some controversy to do with ownership at the club at that time and involvement in the sports hall building and things as well. So the idea of having like sports halls and things which the community and community groups can access has been around for a long time really, but I think Aston Villa is a big leisure centre. I think they were going to host like a Nirvana concert at one point there as well. But I think that just before, I think he died just before that actually happened. But which was tragic actually.
You didn't really laugh, but yeah, it's true.
But then other clubs that, I didn't get it on stream as much, with the new stadiums where they're purpose built with these things built in, they're not like retrofitted, they're built with that in mind to begin with. I think more and more we're seeing that, certainly since the millennium, I think a lot of the new grounds have had these facilities just built in from the beginning.
But there's a substantial risk still to the survival of clubs, I think, where that separation happens, right? And I don't think that's ever been fully resolved. I mean, the York case was quite, as a lot of people in this room will know, it's quite interesting because the chairman surreptitiously kind of moved the ground into a separate vehicle and then eventually kind of sold it, right? And that, or gave Persimmon the rights over it. And that to me, it kind of reflects that sense that actually it's the land ownership in an organisation that is often the kind of 100-year, 1,000-year business, if you like. So I think it still opens up kind of questions about the security of football clubs in the long term, if they are, tenants. I know Coventry City had big kind of issues with this for a long time, for example, as well. So it's not just a kind of a York issue, if you like.
A lot of your talk was about football grounds that no longer exist and where they fit in the psyche of the people that live nearby. There's still a lot of contemporary grounds that have lost significant features that used to make them where they were. I'm a Burnley fan. I used to go to Turf Moor. I've seen the gentleman next to me in a fantastic football shirt. I wish that I could have visited the Longside when that was still a thing. I hear it fondly in the memory of all my family and friends back at home. I do my local cricket stuff now. We've got a urinal, which we call the Longside box, because it used to just be a wall where you go and you do your job. Are there any features of contemporary football grounds that you wish were still about, that exist fondly, that you've come across through your research, that you wish were still there, and thought that seemed like they were a pinnacle of that club's identity?
I've seen some examples where they've been adapted. So one of the things that I really like, and I shouldn't really say this because I don't like the football club, but Sunderland, they've actually retained some of the Archibald Leach lattice steelwork, and they've moved that to the new ground. So I quite like that. In terms of retention and features of old grounds, I think Leeds United, when they got rid of their stand, which was on the image there, there's been certainly, when I've spoken to Leeds fans who live in Leeds, they talk very longingly, and and that was built off the back of them. They won the league and the Premier League came about. So I think that was a major loss. For me as a Borough fan, I mean, I now we've relocated to down by the riverside. I used to go on the Holgate with my dad, and I think there's certainly a lot of emotion attached to these places. I think I've been in touch with Everton Football Club actually on this, because there's huge challenges there, what they're going to do, and luckily the artist I mentioned there, Neville, I think he's an Everton fan, and I think there's a lot of cultural gravitas there, so it'll help remedy that somewhat. Liverpool as well, the Kop isn't the Kop. It's just not. It's on the footprint, but it's not the same stand. The Anfield's changed wholesale almost twice in 28 years. 93, 94 when they built behind the goal. So I think there's certainly something to be done there, and I think there's probably more to factor in. But I focus on the lost grounds rather than the terraces initially. Because if I did the terraces, every ground has the same issue, and invariably it tends to be the popular sides that go down first, because they tend to be the terraced areas, they tend to be the more decrepit areas, they tend to be the cheapest areas, so they tend to be the ones that are replaced because they generate more income if you put them in a nice seated modern day venue. And still have that draw, so you can up the price, but people still want to be in that end. Yeah.
Interesting to add, I once saw South Bank play some kind of FA, I don't know what they're in, the FA Trophy or something, game against Bangor City. They moved it to Essen, and I stood in the Holgate to watch that. Yeah. They moved it to Middlesbrough, saying they're going to get a massive attendance for this game, but it was there wasn't in the end. It was a pretty empty terrace. but I didn't see the game. I didn't see Southbank from the whole game.
But does terracing potentially matter more because people had freedom to move around, etc., and they have parts of the terrace they identify with, and whereas nowadays it's kind of tied up with your season ticket where you sit and that kind of thing. So, and whereas at that time people are much more self-selecting, and it kind of matters what group you're in and all this kind of thing.
Well, I think there's a longing for these pseudo terraces that we have, this standing that we have. And this is a totally unscientific study, but it's the truth. We went to Cardiff City away 6 weeks ago. When you buy the tickets online, you see the portal of where you buy the, where you're going to sit in that. The ones that sold out, well, the ones that were filled straight away are sold out, so you're going to get one seat here and there. It was the safe standing bit. People had this lust to go. You're further away from the pitch, you're at the back at Cardiff. They actually implemented it first in the away end at Cardiff, and then this season they're migrating it to the home end a bit wider. I was speaking with one of their representatives on Friday about this. So people have this, even people who never stood on the terraces, too young to go to Ireland Park, too young to go to Ninian Park. It's got this cultural gravitas where people have this notion of standing there, and if you only have a small away attendance, you'll be able to stand wherever you want with these metal bars in front of you and an Allen key keeping the seat in place, And we've seen it as well. We've seen it in Germany. We've seen it in Germany where they've adapted their grounds. They're doing it at the new camp with their new ground. But again, we talked about grounds, being renovated. The new camp isn't the new camp. Well, it won't be the new camp anymore when it reopens. We were there for the last El Clasico match there, I've been following it. I spoke to Jim O'Brien, who's doing a lot of work on Barca yesterday, and it's just not the same. It's a whole commercial kind of shift, and it poses a challenge for those supporters who have attachment to a particular part of the stand, because these tourists like me are going to go and sit in there,
Kevin can probably talk. I mean, both of us could, but I think Kevin should have some airtime here because we've just been to Barcelona to give a paper at a university there.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting because it's good that they're keeping the setting in the city there, I would say. But it surprised us the extent of kind of reconstruction, given how culturally significant it is in football. And there seems to be, considering its cultural significance, relatively little commemoration there, actually. We went to the museum as well, and it's very kind of sanitised, I would say, and very much aimed at, showing off the kind of how many Champions Cups they have, rather than...
It's a temporary museum at the minute. They've scaled it down, but
it's temporary. But
the accommodation we were in, they put Kevin in an annex, which was it was complicated. But I was in the main tower, and from where the lifts, the elevators were, it overlooked down into the new camp, or the Camp Nou, whatever you want to say it. You could see all the renovation going on. As I went up to the 10th floor of this block of student halls we're staying in. And you could look down into the stadium and see all the work they're doing. Then we walked the perimeter of it as well, and got lots of photographs. And
we saw the old training camp. Forget the name of it now.
Yeah, the old farmhouse where Messi and so on learned the trade.
But
it's just boarded up.
Pretty much abandoned, and that's quite sad actually, because that's kind of like it's considered to be where kind of modern kind of tiki-taka football started and all this kind of thing. But it just seems to be,
I think there's also a question about how do you incentivise clubs to keep this culture and this heritage, And I think projects like Historic England have shown the value of, the kind of selling football through this heritage. And I know the borough at the minute we're having a new badge designed to commemorate the 150th anniversary. So there's a bit of a shift there. Man City done it a few years back as well, and so I think there's a recognition that there's a value and an attachment, to not just the grounds, but this kind of romanticised notion of in our case, an unsuccessful past. People have that kind of clinging on to it.
But is there a sense here that the stakeholders changing is the problem? So a lot of kind of Premier League clubs, they have the problem that they're not really there for the local community as such. They've become global, right? So.
If
Could I ask you?
Yeah.
Who owns York City? Who should own York City? Who should own your local football team? Manchester United or Fleetwood Town? Who should own it?
Well, for some of those clubs, there's in the 1980s, Tottenham Hotspur pioneered this way of setting up a holding company to own the club, basically as a way around finances. I'm not saying it's ethically right, but a lot of clubs followed that model. So ownership now, I mean, it could be owned by any number of interests, really. I think at York they have some fan
It's Canadian
involvement. It's a Canadian family.
Canadian family that are in it now.
They're known as the main owners, but I think they're a fans group. Certainly, until recently, had some involvement as well. But other people here would know better than me.
The problem with fans groups has been that they often will sell out to buy it as well. So they'll say, "Oh yeah, great, we're in the club now," and then I think that happened at Portsmouth, and after all the problems Portsmouth had, and yet they still sold out to a bigger buyer.
There are examples like FC United of Manchester, so the clubs that formed when a team goes bust, you get a new Wimbledon, or moves, you get a new Wimbledon, a new Manchester United and Liverpool team sprouting up to be almost like the anti-capitalist version of that team. But they come against the problem because the main logic, I mean, Tosh says it's about money, and it kind of is, but more than that, it's about success, winning. The money's, some people benefit from that very stakeholder. The fans want the team to win, so the money they see as a means to an end. The problem with the fan-owned things is, one, they all fall out because there's so many, cooks making this broth, and secondly, they can't raise finance to get to the next level. You can only sell so many shares locally, and it's a good standpoint to say no sponsor on the kit, but then what happens when you need to go up a division or something,
So, what would you like to see?
Me personally, I'd like to see a more innocent time where clubs were not just in it purely for money and ripping off fans. But I'll never get that.
I think there's certainly a question for this. In Germany, everyone bangs on about the German model, the 51% model, where you have this supposed fan ownership, and it's very dubious. And I think there's mechanisms whereby you can make the fans have a bit more of a stake in the decision-making process. So whether that be through forums, whether that be through supporters collectors, whether it be through offering a percentage of the shares. But ultimately, we're operating in a football environment now where if you don't play the financial game, you instead have to go and have your own little club that alludes to some kind of footballing nostalgia that will never compete at the same level as your Boroughs, your West Broms, the glamour of the Championship. Never mind the Premier League.
All right, a couple of last questions we should try and let in. So I go up here first, and then because we've got a couple of minutes left.
Yes, my name's Matthew. I'm a North Ferriby fan, so very kind of non-league kind of level. We enjoyed a couple of seasons with York City. York City's Bootham Crescent away end was something else entirely. We've experienced it and on absolutely wonderful occasions. Just a couple of points. Talked about kind of the separation of the ground and the club ownership and things like that, and that's where the independent football regulators coming in. So that's the kind of umbrella for a lot of this in terms of heritage assets and club badges and things. Second point around, want to just throw in a ground that is really good to visit with a bit of terrace is Cathkin Park in Glasgow, kind of up there. There is now kind of more recently where Third Lanark kind of played. That's a lost ground and a lost club. And you've got this battle now going on that kind of people are using that kind of community assets being locked out of that, I think, kind of more recently in recent news around that. So that's a great place to be. And just one thing that you just raised there, Alex, around community football clubs and them reaching a level and kind of and community. There's a great community football club at a kind of a quite low level in East London called Clapton Community Football Club, who kind of a long story of how they kind of came into being, but ultimately they, as a community-owned club and fan-owned, now own the ground that they they play at, which is the old Spotted Dog Club ground in East London, which is the oldest ground in London.
Wow.
So they have come full circle and are a community club who work effectively at a lower level, but who own the oldest ground in London.
Very interesting, thank you.
And their fans are quite famous in the league now, aren't they? The club and ultras. Yeah.
But I've been up to the Third Atlantic, and I was speaking with Richard from the Scottish Football Museum, so I think we've got one more over here, we've got time.
Squeeze her in.
All right, go on, yeah.
Anyway, you haven't mentioned the Darlington case. To me, there's an awful lot of what's been said this morning. So I think just want to make a quick comment on that.
Yeah.
You like gold plumbing?
Feethams to George Rosen.
Obviously Darlington, the lost Feethams, and the fans. And everyone goes on about George Reynolds being this crook, which he was. That's not liable. It's a fact. You know, he's out with jail and then into Darlington. He tried to turn the kit into a Sunderland kit, a red and white kit they're going to have. But yeah, Mackems. But in the case of Darlow, that was where you had the football club right next to the cricket club. The Darlington fans bought into that wholesale. I remember that they thought they were going to compete with the Borough, Sunderland, Newcastle, and then they moved to this white elephant of the Reynolds Arena. It wasn't sustainable, didn't have any infrastructure, had no attachment. The fan base wasn't there. They went too fast. It was too quick, and it's all about this celebrity of an individual. But don't forget with Darlington, everyone, blames Reynolds for this, but I think fans want to consider, how do you want to leave your ground? How desperate are you for success? Do you support the team at the present and their success, independent of do you support sustainability and the long-term future of your football club? So short-term gratification or long-term gain, and I think that's often lost because people want new, shiny, be on the telly, play Aston Villa in the FA Cup, and then after that, when it's not as exciting, when you're getting beat 3-0 away at Rochdale, what happens then? So I think there's a lot of caution from Darlow, yeah.
All right. So as I understand it, we had 1 hour.
Yeah, so we have to.
We're now at the hour, unfortunately. So we probably, I think, have to wrap it up at this point. But Tosh, are you hanging around to? He's going to meet his people afterwards. If anyone's got more questions or wants to ask him about his book idea, talk to him about that, please do. And have you got any books for sale in the bookstore out there?
I've not today, no, I'm badly organised, but I've got a new book out tomorrow for anyone who's interested in bridges, bit independent of football, but if anyone likes Dorman long vertical lift bridges over the River Tees, not a niche market at all, that's out tomorrow, it arrives tomorrow.
It's another type of engineering. Another type of engineering. Okay, thanks everyone.
When's council coming in?
End of the year, apparently. It's my fault because I've not made my amends and I've not done one interview. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Tosh.
Right. Yeah.